What is up, enthusiasts? It is Cedar Flags here, and welcome back to another one of my videos. Today, I want to talk about one of my favorite amusement parks of all time. Kings Island is located in southwestern Ohio near Cincinnati in the town of Mason, and let me say, this park is absolutely incredible. It's extremely well-rounded and has a phenomenal coaster collection on top of all of that. So today, I wanted to look at all of the rides at Kings Island, at least the coasters, and rank them from the very worst to the very best. This is going to be a pretty long video, so I think I'm going to start right now. So without further ado, this is Cedar Flags, and today I'm going to rank the coasters of Kings Island. Coming in at the number 14 spot is actually the only coaster at the park I have not ridden. This is the Great Pumpkin Coaster, which is an E&F Miler oval coaster. There really isn't that much to say about this ride. It's a kiddie coaster. I've ridden a few other E&F Milers, but never this model, but I'd assume it's around the same. These E&F Milers are basically for the younger folks out there, so us enthusiasts aren't really going to get a kick out of this as much as they do. Anyway, it's pretty self-explanatory why this is at 14. Coming in at the number 13 spot is Flying Ace Ariel Chase. Also in Planet Snoopy, this ride really isn't that good either. I would actually say it would be very close to the Great Pumpkin Coaster, but this is a little bigger, so I guess it gets a little bit of the edge. But anyway, this roller coaster really isn't even that good for a family coaster. This is what they call a Vekoma Hang and Bang, and they say that for a reason. This ride has a very notable reputation for banging your head around even though the ride doesn't go any more than 25 miles an hour, and yeah, it really does. Some of these transitions along with the restraints really cause a head-banging experience, and it could be a baby's first SLC. At the number 12 spot might be a very surprising pick. This is Adventure Express. Now you might notice that there is another kiddie coaster I haven't gotten to yet, which is because I actually prefer that over this. Adventure Express is the first non-kiddie coaster I've talked about, and man, this thing is jerky. I've ridden other Aero mine trains like Cedar Creek Mine Ride, and I really didn't find it as bad. Even Trailblazer at Hershey Park, that ride gets a very bad reputation for being jerky, but I didn't find that a tenth as jerky as Adventure Express. Adventure Express is very fast-paced, but has extremely rough and tight transitions, making the ride nearly unbearable for me. I really don't know what it is about this ride, but I am just not a fan whatsoever. If you reprofiled some of the sections and gave the ride a remodel, then maybe I'll consider trying it again. Coming in at the number 11 spot, we have Woodstock Express, the clonable PTC Woody that opened up in the 70s. This ride is pretty enjoyable and is actually my favorite ride in the kiddie area of the park. I really adore these little tiny Woodstock Express models, and I think they do a really good job at pleasing the younger ones. I really don't have much to say about this ride. I mainly got it for the credit, but this ride may give a little bit of floater airtime during some parts of the ride. It is pretty enjoyable even for someone like me, but wouldn't be something I would go out of my way for. Okay, now let's get to some major coasters. I'm tired of talking about the kiddie stuff. At the number 10 spot, we have Invertigo, the Vekoma Invertigo model at the front of the park. I have to say this is a very underrated coaster. Yes, I know it is all the way at the number 10 spot, but despite that, this is still a pretty good ride for a Vekoma Boomerang, especially with these kind of restraints. This is the Invertigo model, which means you are face to face with the people in front of you, and at the same time you are coasting under the track. If you ride this in a reasonable area and brace yourself, you're going to get little to no headbanging, and it is a pretty enjoyable experience if you know how to ride this. But other than that, it really isn't anything special. It's your basic Boomerang clone but in an inverted model, and it really isn't that special. This was my first ever Vekoma Boomerang, so it might have a little bit of sentimental value to me, but at the same time, it still is just a boomerang. At the number 9 spot, we have Backlot Stunt Coaster, the Premier Rides Family Launch Coaster. This is a pretty enjoyable ride. It is a clone, and I have gotten to ride another one of these at King's Dominion, and I have to say these rides are pretty fun, but they are pretty family oriented at the same time. Despite that, there are some pretty forceful elements. My favorite on a ride either being the indoor portion, which is very unpredictable, or the helix right at the beginning of the ride after that first launch. If you don't know, this helix is actually pretty forceful and may or may not make you gray out. During the ride, you'll coast through a few theming elements, and I would have to say it is a pretty enjoyable ride. I really have no complaints here. It caters to the family instead of thrill seekers, so it shouldn't be as thrilling as it is, but at the same time, it isn't too thrilling. Anyway, this ride does give a thumbs up for me, but there are still 8 other coasters that I think are superior. The number 8 spot goes to yet another clone. That is right, the 4th clone in a row. We have Flight of Fear. Now, Flight of Fear is an indoor premier ride spaghetti bowl themed after the Outer Limits TV series, and I have to say, this ride is pretty mixed for me. In my 2017 visit when I rode this, I got some pretty good rides, especially in the front row. There was very little head banging, but I went back to this park in 2021, got to ride this a few times, and the ride was nearly unbearable. I mean, it was bad. I don't know what kind of ride I got, but it was an absolutely horrible ride. And if I only based this off of my 2021 rides, this would probably be lower than even in Vertigo. See, this ride though, I am judging based off of both of my trips. I have to say 2017, this ride would be much higher. So I decided to put it in the middle tier at the number 8 spot. I absolutely love the concept for this ride. I love being in the dark. This is easily the most themed ride at Kings Island, and I absolutely love every second of it. It's just, there are a few rough spots that ruin parts of it. If this ride got a little bit of a makeover, nothing too substantial, I think it would be golden. I don't know what it is, but I do have a soft spot for Flight of Fear. Once again, this concept is incredible, the ride layout's pretty good and compact, extremely forceful, and I'm sure if I were outside I'd be graying out. But I digress. Flight of Fear is an absolutely phenomenal concept, but could be a little rough at some points. At the number 7 spot, we go to the Bat, an aero suspended coaster. Oh my goodness, Paramount added a lot of clones. Anyway, back to the Bat. The Bat honestly might be my favorite aero of all time, if I'm not including Vortex, which was at Kings Island before it got removed. Yes, I like this ride more than rides like Tennessee Tornado and Magnum XL200. I don't know why, but I have a massive soft spot for the Bat. I truly adore this ride so much. I love almost everything about it. There's so many great things about it. Anyway, let's get into the ride. You start off with a really cool first drop that leads into a very high overbank turn. This really doesn't give you that much feeling of G-force, but oh my goodness, the second half of this ride is going to make you absolutely speechless. The second half of this ride is very low to the ground, and when you turn, you swing a complete 90-degree angle. This happens multiple times on the ride, and you could truly feel the G-force with your legs on the cart. This is just truly an amazing ride. The ride is nearly butter smooth even after over 20 years of operation, and really feels like a brand new experience. The ride does have a short duration, but it doesn't really feel that short. It feels like you're zooming through the trees and throughout the structure for a while, even though the ride experience itself is less than a minute. I truly do have a soft spot for this ride and really hope it could stay for years to come. Who knows, maybe even add a ride in between this and Banshee, so it could look more filling within the park, instead of a ride that's all the way in this dead end that's very secluded from the park. At the number 6 spot, a very surprising spot. I did not know this coaster was going to make it this high. It is Racer, a ride that opened up with the park and has a very big history. A lot of people say that Kings Island, along with the Racer, was one of the sole reasons that roller coasters came back into a new wave. If it wasn't for the park and this ride, who knows where the roller coaster would be today. Remember what I said about Flight of Fear? Well, this ride is the exact opposite. When I first rode this in 2017, it was absolutely unbearable. I only rode it to get at least one credit, and that was the red side of Racer, and I sat in the very, very back, which I didn't know at the time was going to be the worst row on the ride. The ride was terribly painful, and was one of the worst experiences I've ever had on a coaster. It was bad. But at the same time, when I got home, I realized that was not the best row to sit in. And when I came back in 2021, I decided to check out the front. And let me say, especially after the Gravity Group Retrack this coaster got, This ride is running better than I could ever imagine. This ride honestly runs like a modern wooden coaster. That's how smooth it is. You go down that first drop, and those low to the ground airtime hills, they give some pretty decent airtime. In fact, maybe even some ejector at some points. This ride truly does feel like the complete racing experience. You start off with low to the ground airtime hills, and then quickly approach away from the cart next to you going into a turnaround, and then even more ejector or floater airtime hills. This really feels like a coaster ahead of its time, especially with the Retrack, and does not feel like a coaster from the early 70s. I really do adore this ride, and I have it much higher than I originally did 4 years ago. Now getting into the top 5, we have the big guns. We have the coasters that make Kings Island, Kings Island. A lot of people love this top 5, and a lot of people debate over this top 5. If I know one park that has a very controversial top 5, it's Kings Island. Everyone I talk to, it's arranged very slightly differently than the other, but they are most likely going to be the same 5 coasters. And at the number 5 spot, we have Banshee, the B&M invert from 2014. Man, what a ride. When I originally rode this back in 2017, it was one of my favorite, if not my favorite B&M. But after riding more B&Ms including Fury 325, Montu, and a coaster I'm going to mention later, let me just say this coaster has gone down a bit. The elements are very forceful, but are few and far in between, and just don't have that same pacing as the old school ones. But this ride still holds a place within its own, and even though it doesn't feel like a B&M invert, it still feels similar. Let me explain. This ride does not have a pre-drop, and it goes right into the drop. So if you're sitting in the back rows, you're going to be yonked over that. And it's a pretty weird feeling for a B&M invert. You go into a massive dive loop, which is a really great element, but I don't think the party starts until halfway through the ride. My favorite sequence on this ride is following that 0G roll, going into that one-of-a-kind pretzel knot, and leading into that second vertical loop. This vertical loop, well, at least the one by the pretzel loop, gives some extreme positive G-forces. Some of the most I've ever experienced on a B&M. And after that, you go into one of the wonkiest elements I've ever experienced on a B&M, a very slow heartline roll. And I'm talking slow. You get some pretty crazy hang time on this element, and it really stands out with all the other elements on the ride focusing mainly on positive Gs. Anyway, even though this doesn't feel like a complete B&M invert with its shorter duration, it's still an absolutely incredible ride, and I love the concept of it gaining momentum as the ride goes. This is truly a ride experience you will not regret by the end of it. At the number 4 spot, we have the Beast, the old late 70s in-house built wooden coaster designed by Charles Din. Man, this ride is a truly unforgettable experience. Judging by ride layout, it really isn't much. The ride mostly consists of straight track and maybe some very mild floater airtime hills, but that's not the point of the ride. If this were a parking lot coaster, it would suck. But this ride has one of the best settings of any roller coaster on the planet. It is located in the middle of the woods. Let me explain. On the first lift hill, yes, the first lift hill, you drop into a pitch black tunnel. And once you arise from the tunnel, you are in the middle of the woods of Kings Island's river town. You go through many tunnels, many breaks, and despite this ride being at least a little forceless, it still feels like an adventure throughout the woods. After that, you go into a second lift hill, make a left-hand turn, and go into a absolutely massive double helix. This can be painful if you don't brace, but if you do brace, it's going to be very interesting on those lateral sides. This ride at night is very infamous and might be one of the best night rides of all time. Some people even say that night rides on Beast are the holy grail of roller coaster rides. And as someone who's gotten a night ride on Beast in the front row, I could somewhat agree with that. Night rides on Beast in the front row don't even feel like coasters. They feel like movies. If you want to ride for the G-force, this isn't going to be it. But if you want to ride based on an adventure through the woods of Kings Island, this is going to be perfect for you. I know some people who say this is one of their favorite rides at Kings Island, and might even make their top 2. But at least for me, it sticks right off of the top 3. At the number 3 spot, we have the one and only Mystic Timbers, the GCI out and back Woody at the park that came out in 2017. And this is definitely the fan favorite when it comes to roller coaster enthusiasts and fans alike. This ride is pretty violent. And when I say violent, I don't mean rough, but I mean the transitions are extremely fast paced. And as someone who has extremely fast paced coasters all over my top 20, which will come out soon, I have to say this ride doesn't make the top 2 for me. And I'll explain why later, but let me talk about this ride first. Mystic Timbers is a great Woody, in fact one of my favorite Woodies. It's got some insane ejector airtime moments from start to finish. From the time you leave that lift chain and go into the first drop, to the time you park and go into the shed, this ride is non-stop. There will be no breaks. The ride consists of a lot of banked ejector airtime hills, S-bends, and turnarounds, and the ride really feels like a blur. The trees are broing past you, and it really feels like the Beast but on steroids, if it were a little shorter. This ride though still definitely has a great rep in the park, and is definitely one of my favorites when it comes to wooden airtime machines. The theming on the other hand, pretty good for a Cedar Fair park. The lift chain is honestly my favorite part where it stops and goes and has on-ride audio. The shed is just a block zone with a few decorations and a projector, but we already all know that. Anyway, talking about the layout, like I said, pretty forceful, has some very good moments, and the pacing is extreme. Plus, this ride is extremely smooth. It honestly feels like an RMC hybrid on some days, especially if you're sitting in the front. Yes, after even 4 years of this ride, it still feels butter smooth. Unlike another wooden coaster that opened up that year, cough cough mind blower. But anyway, this ride has been maintained extremely well, and still runs as good as it did in its opening year. Coming in at the number 2 spot, we have Orion, the B&M Giga at the park, and it is the newest ride at the park coming out in 2020. Yes, this ride is my number 2. It is a lot of people's number 1, either this or Mystic Timbers, but this reigns at the second place spot for me. And let me explain why. The ride starts off with an incredible first drop, and if you're sitting in the front or back, you're going to get 2 completely different experiences. If you're sitting in the front, you're going to get a great floater moment looking down 300 feet, and if you sit in the back, you are going to be absolutely yanked over that first drop. If you've ever ridden Raging Bull, that's what it feels like. After that, you go into a pretty cool bank turn, which really doesn't feel like much, but after those 2 banked moments, the ride really picks up. The speed hill after the second overbank turn is one of the most insane airtime moments on a B&M. You are sustained and out of your seat for at least 3 seconds. This hill is no joke. And after that, you go into a pretty insane floater hill. This might be my favorite moment on the ride just because of how sustained the floater is and feels like non-stop lifting out of your seat. Once you go back into your seat, you go into this amazing helix, which may or may not make you gray out. This has the nickname Orion's Belt, and I think it's a very good and clever name. You go into a near miss element right under the first drop, and go into a very weird airtime moment, especially for a B&M. It's banked, so it will differentiate depending on where you sit, and it feels just awkward, but in the best way possible. A lot of people say this is their favorite moment on the ride, and even though I'd have to disagree, I could see why it would be some people's favorites. Anyway, this ride does completely feel like a complete package. I know when this ride came out, people, including me, bashed the ride for not feeling like a complete layout, but I really feel like it hit the home run on this. Yes, it could be a little longer, and it's not Fury 325 by any stretch of the imagination, but the layout of the ride is promising and a very fitting pick for Kings Island. And so, that leaves me with one roller coaster. It is, in my opinion, the crown jewel of Kings Island, and one of the best coasters I have ever ridden in my entire life. This is Diamondback, the B&M Hyper opening up in 2009. Remember when I said that floater hill was my favorite moment on Orion because it had constant, sustained floater airtime? Make that every element on a ride. That is Diamondback. Diamondback is the king of floater airtime. It makes floater airtime one of the best elements on the planet. Once you get into that first drop, you start to experience that lifting feeling, and you better be getting used to that because you are going to feel that for the rest of the ride. My favorite moment is easily the hill right after the first drop. This second hill lifts you out of your seat for a good 7 seconds. A lot of people say that Mako delivers a good 5 seconds of airtime on a hill, but if you're sitting in the front, you are going to be out of your seat in zero gravity weightlessness for at least 6 or 7 seconds. It's an eye-crushing experience, and even though it's not an extremely forceful sustained moment, you feel like you are floating, and you feel that for the rest of the ride. I've ridden some B&M Hypers, Cough Cough Raging Bull, where most of the ride has some very weak floater and doesn't feel like much. Diamondback, on the other hand, every hill delivers some extremely strong flowjector airtime. If you want sustained airtime and just that feeling of constantly being out of your seat all at once, yeah, Diamondback is the answer for you. In fact, I wouldn't doubt that this ride could match Steel Vengeance on the duration of airtime it has. This ride really feels like the complete floater airtime package, and I don't think there's a floater machine out there better than Diamondback. Yes, I do prefer ejector over floater, and you might be thinking, so why isn't Mystic Timbers over this? Well, let me say, even though I do prefer ejector, I would say Mystic Timbers is nowhere near the best ejector machine out there, but let me say, Diamondback is the best of its craft. Diamondback is the best floater machine I have ever experienced. I love this ride, and even though it doesn't blow me away with intensity, it is pure fun. In fact, I have this ride ranked over some rides like Lightning Rod and Fury 325. Yes, this is my favorite B&M, and I adore this ride to death. This ride truly means so much to me, and I could ride this ride all day. It's that perfect balance between calm and insane. It is Diamondback. Anyway, what did you think about my list? I know not a lot of people see Diamondback on the number 1 spot of the Kings Island lists, but I decided to put it up there to show it some more love. Let me know what you thought in the comments below, give me a good thumbs up or thumbs down, and click that subscribe button if you haven't already. This video is going on way too long, so this is Cedar Flags, and I will see you all later. Last chance to escape the wrath of the beast. Oh no, where's the beast?